Oh, well, it was even worse because that was in public. We were having a design meeting. Yeah, we were having a design meeting, and he said that in front of the entire team. This is an example of everything we're doing wrong.
That's messed up, dude. What's up, guys? A couple people wanted me to actually react to a interview done with a former Bethesda developer. He's pretty well known, actually, Shen, who worked on Skyrim, Fallout 4, Fallout 76, and Starfield. And I'm not going to react to the whole thing because it would probably take a while. But I am going to pick out some interesting parts that I picked up on, especially in regards to, Will as a person, because I think that's super important. And some of the things he said resonate with me, not just in regards to like the game development industry, but just life in general. And the second thing is obviously Bethesda. Like, this interview definitely granted me, and I think several others, a big insight into not just how the game development industry works, but also just Bethesda Game Studios itself. Of note, interestingly, out of all the interviews that I've seen, all the video interviews and the articles where they do talk about Todd Howard, it's interesting to note that, most of the time they don't really have anything bad to say about Todd Howard. I think Shen specifically says he's never really within arm's reach of Todd Howard because Todd Howard is just really up there. I am going to be looking at things like Kurt Kuhlmann, because we did in a previous video cover the firing of Kurt Kuhlmann, who is regarded as one of the, or maybe the brain for Elder Scrolls lore.
So there's a story where you worked on the Skyrim quest, Taste of Death, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I heard a story that Emil pretty much came to you and was like, this is the worst quest in the entire game.
So he's talking about Emil Pagliarulo, who has been in the spotlight for his comments about players and, of course, Starfield being the best thing they've done over at Bethesda Game Studios, on a technical level and potentially on a writing level as well, which many people have disputed. And he's made several questionable tweets as well in regards to Starfield and people's kind of reception of it. So this is Emil Pagliarulo telling, Shen in front of all these people, right, at work, that his quest, the Mirror quest line for Skyrim, which I felt like it was okay, is terrible. And I think that's like such a unprofessional thing to do, especially as a supervisor or boss. And given my own experiences in the past, 2-3 years, it kind of makes sense to me that certain people cut from the same cloth would act like that. So I'm not really too surprised that Emil would just publicly humiliate him.
Part of the reason you left, because everything had become siloed? Or did you just want to move on to greener pastures? Did you just not want the pressure of working on Elder Scrolls 6? What was it?
I think the main thing for me was that it was mostly personal. I had been there for a long time.
Yeah, a long time.
I joined the organization in my early 20s. I was now in my early 40s. And a lot of my identity was wrapped up in this studio and its success. That's one of the dangers of success, is that it's intoxicating and it becomes a part of you that you want to hold on to. It's very hard to let go of that. And it's very difficult to separate your identity from that success and wanting to repeat that success over and over again and have that be a part of you. But it's not your identity. And one day you wake up and you're like, I don't know if I recognize myself anymore. I don't know if I've ever recognized myself anymore. I haven't taken any time since, college to really ask the big questions about life and who I am and what do I want. And I think that was the point where I was like, I have a choice ahead of me. I can stay and just become the organization, be the uniform. Or I can leave and risk trying to discover who I really am. I hate to say, it sounds so hokey when I say it, but
I don't think it sounds hokey. I think that sounds wonderful. And I think that's what a lot of people don't get the chance to do so. And, something about his comments about the intoxication of success really I feel like struck a chord with me just now in terms of like when we're a lot of us are observing Bethesda from the outside, like this kind of over reliance or apparent over reliance on the modding community for Starfield, or maybe like just these like weird statements coming from some developers like Emil Peglarulo in regards to Starfield. I think that kind of shows, I mean, I think they are, and they should be, right? They should be more than proud of their success. They should be more than proud of their achievements. But I think, like he's saying here, it's hard to let that go in favor of accepting like actual constructive feedback from people who actually do love the games. So it's going to be interesting to see how they approach Elder Scrolls 6, because a lot of the old heads from Bethesda have left or were fired. It's hard to say if, especially, we'll talk about this soon, with Kuhlmann gone, if even lore-wise, the Elder Scrolls 6 will be something that a lot of people will look at. And, you know, of course, gameplay-wise is a huge issue, right? And we'll also talk about that later in the video in regards to, you know, Creation Engine versus Unreal, how they have certain designs for the Bethesda games now. When you compared to a very hyper competitive marketplace with so many other games and RPGs, it's not the same time or place compared to when Oblivion came out, compared to when Skyrim came out. So I think there's going to be genuine concerns from a lot of people about what Elder Scrolls 6 will look, what even Fallout 5 will look like, right? So I really do appreciate his candidness and honesty in why he left. It makes sense.
That was the choice. If I don't leave now, it is my identity.
Yeah.
Because it has been such an important part of my life. All my friends came from the studio, you know, and I had been through a lot there. You know, people left, people died. I buried 2 colleagues over the course of my career there. So that was very hard emotionally.
Next question from Pedro Gomes-CX7KU. Interesting name. Kurt Kuhlmann was the informal lore master of the Elder Scrolls at Bethesda. Now that he has left, who has taken up the mantle?
Oh, I don't know.
Pretty sure he didn't leave. He basically got like fired.
I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
I will say though, man, yeah, Kurt was great. If you had any Elder Scrolls question, he knew it, or he had an opinion about it.
I'm interested to see what Will Shen thinks about the massive void left by Kuhlmann.
So there wasn't anyone who was like a protege of his that could have possibly taken over? I mean, there'd obviously be people.
Know.
Yeah.
Because you also have the Elder Scrolls Online and all of its lore.
Yeah.
And I think
you know,
I think ZeniMax
we
Online,
actually had an interview with the Elder Scrolls Online lore master, and it's like what it comes down to is it's a team effort. So I think in regards to Kuhlmann, they're probably going to replace him with a team of lore experts, or I guess lore, the Elder Scrolls experts in regards to stories and lore. So there'll probably be, and this is kind of related to their pipeline, their efficiency in terms of work that other former Bethesda devs have talked about after leaving the company. Will that introduce additional wrenches in the production pipeline? Will that delay more things for what they do? It is kind of interesting that so many of the former Bethesda devs that have talked about what it's like to work at Bethesda Game Studios up until Starfield was like, there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's just a lot of back and forth over even simple things like chairs now compared to when it was like a smaller team or smaller studio. So it's going to be interesting to see how they tackle that in terms of like work efficacy.
Studios might even have like official lore masters, like as part of their pipeline. They need someone who can reconcile all of the lore in the Elder Scrolls universe. So they might actually have, that might actually be an official position.
What I took away from our interview with the lore master back then was it's like the lore master is also like a safeguard. Like you guys can't go too crazy, if that makes sense.
Internally at like Bethesda Game Studios, that makes the open world single player role playing games and Fallout 76, that I don't know who that would be. Because not because there isn't anyone, but because that could be any number of people, and it kind of just depends on who
probably teams,
the leadership or Todd or whoever wants that person to be.
Yeah, but would there be some sort of massive document at Bethesda that would contain all the lore? So
the funny thing is, one of the first assignments I had as a design intern was they were building an internal wiki site for all the lore, and
interesting.
I was data entering basically all of.
They have their own internal wiki.
All the previous games up until
makes sense. I mean,
and
I think some D&D
wiki that they were building
masters have their own internal wikis for their own games.
Again, when I came back from Skyrim, so it was fun to be like, oh yeah, I remember when I added this book to the lore wiki. All the
but I'm surprised they wouldn't use like the Imperial Library or UESP for that. I guess they just want to be comfortable and have their own internal wiki. Probably more friendly to them somehow, like in terms of navigation.
So there's internal documentation, but I also don't know what they've built out since I've left.
In regards to the planets on Starfield, how did you come to the number of planets that you guys had in the end?
1,000 sounds like a nice number.
I don't
That's
remember.
How.
Bruce would probably know for sure where the number came from because he was the.
I think he's talking about Bruce Nesmith.
The planet's guy.
And well, in terms of making sure all the astronomy was correct, like that was something he was personally passionate about, and so he put in some work there. There were other people who worked on the planet system as well, so I don't want to pave over them, but I don't know where the number actually came from. It was probably a desire to like, hey, if we roughly made it this size in terms of space, how many solar systems would that be? So I don't really know.
Okay.
Yeah, because how much of a difference would it have made between, like, say, 900 planets versus 1,500 planets? At what point does it really matter, or like, how much does the compounding effect of workload make it viable?
Yeah, it depends on how you build out your procedural content system. I would say for me, it was the difference between one planet or any number of planets. It would have been if we say like, hey, let's forget the procedural content, let's just make it all handcrafted.
Okay.
Well, then you're looking at like a Skyrim or a Fallout format.
Right.
And we might as well just make it one contiguous full space at that point. If you want to make a procedural system and like procedurally gen a planet, then it kind of doesn't matter how many you make past that point. I think that realistically, a player probably is only going to visit maybe a dozen or 2 dozen of them, unless they want to just keep going forever. So maybe that would have been, based on the playtesting data, maybe that would have been a better amount to tune for in terms of like content density. But you're also at the mercy of how do you create the planet and stitch it together, and what are all the streaming and loading bearings, and there's all these technical limitations that are going to kind of constrain the design in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
So once you decide to have proc gen planets, it kind of doesn't matter what the number ultimately is. Beyond,
I get what you're saying about like, well, once you introduce procedural generated content, it's like it doesn't matter how many you add in, because that versus the amount of handcrafted content, well, it's probably going to be a higher ratio in favor of the procedurally generated content. And it was for Starfield, but I would disagree with him to some extent, not about the technical stuff, because again, massive respect to these guys for their technical prowess in implementing certain things in Starfield. I don't think anyone can deny that in terms of like the technical marvel of some of the things that we saw in Starfield from a game development perspective. But I think in terms of design and how you approach procedurally generated content, they could have done it a lot better. A lot of people bring up the saying where Starfield, after a while, is as wide as the ocean, as deep as a puddle. And that's a very valid point to bring up if you're not into kind of essentially repeating the same exploration over and over again, just in kind of like different settings, depending on the planets or solar systems that are procedurally generated, or rather the areas on the planets that are procedurally generated, or the moons. I think that was probably a double-edged sword for Starfield's design, right? On one hand, you have procedurally generated content, which is like lacking in the base game. But on the other, you might have an interested modding community to treat that as a huge playground. And yes, it is undeniable that, based on past interviews with Todd Howard as well, that they did want Starfield as an IP to be something played for 10 plus years, like Skyrim. And that's really owed due to the modding community, the longevity offered by people who are enthusiastic about the game. But I think the miscalculation there was, well, they couldn't get a lot of the modding community to be interested in doing what they did for Skyrim or even like Oblivion. So I think that was a great miscalculation, especially in terms of how they approach procedurally generated content. I get what you're saying in regards to like the ratio and some of the design points, but I think that is definitely Starfield's pitfall in retrospect. And I think that was also a big wound, because when the DLC came out, the Shattered Space DLC, I was like, okay, I really hope they came out with, things that would indicate that they took the player feedback in regards to the content, in regards to the quest design, in regards to narrative, in regards to writing, and all this stuff. It didn't have to be a Phantom Liberty DLC for Cyberpunk. It didn't have to be, Shadow of the Erdtree kind of level. It just had to have not new things, but like an indication of this is different from the base game. But nowhere in Shattered Space did I find that. And if you watch the review video I made, it's basically just, it feels like it's something that could have belonged in the base game as another faction quest line. But yeah, again, super appreciate his insight into the technical details on, and also some of the design perspectives on the number of planets in Starfield, or the procedural generated content.
It's either one or infinite. Pick any number you want.
But wouldn't you still need like a ridiculous amount of QA testers to test all that?
Well, ideally, you have subject matter expert QA that is testing the system and is going through the system as a whole, because it's proc gen, right? There are rules for how these things are created. So you're testing the rules of the system, and that's true of any procedural generated system. You can't test all outcomes because it's explosive, exponentially explosive. It's on that huge curve.
Yeah. So, were you aware of that as you were working on Starfield? You're like, all these different.
It goes all the way back to around the time when we were starting Fallout 76.
Yeah.
And starting up that project, because that was when Bethesda started to actually kind of create sister location studios. Montreal became a studio. BGS Austin became a studio. And so hitting that scale point was definitely a huge change. And in retrospect, looking back on it, it seems like a lot of very identifiable management patterns with scaling hit Bethesda at that time and continued until the release of Starfield. And afterwards, I left. So who knows?
Right. A lot of people have brought up the number of employees for Bethesda Game Studios has ballooned or has gone up tremendously since the days of Morrowind or even Skyrim. And that may have had an impact on the result of their products, or I guess result of their work, at least for Starfield recently. And I would say, Larry and other acclaimed studios and even other big companies have a lot more, or just as many, or maybe slightly less number of employees. And I think it's probably just going to come down to a management issue that, of course, directly impacts the workflow issue. And that's kind of the same kind of idea I'm getting from not just this interview, but the other interviews done with Will Shen and other former Bethesda developers, where things could have probably been managed better for a better workflow.
Every meeting has a cost beyond even just the sheer cost of the meeting itself, which I wish that someone did like a UI mock-up of like, what if meeting requests had the actual cost when you did it? Like, I wish they did that, because, oh man, so expensive.
Yeah, because I've worked for companies in the past where I've attended meetings and I'm like, would anyone actually really care if I wasn't here?
Mm-hmm.
You know, or it's like,
or this could be an email.
Yeah, like why do I need to be here? Why is this meeting taking place? Because sometimes it does feel like the meeting is being held just for the purpose of the person who's having the meeting. So it looks good to their superior. You're like, oh, I had a meeting about this. But I don't know how productive it is. I mean, how many of those 20 meetings you were having a week would you say were actually productive?
I think you could easily have done like a quarter of the meetings. And this is also something I did on like when I was art lead on 76. I just like ended up canceling more than half of the meetings as we went to ship. It's like, because so many of these meetings were like standing meetings every single week. It's like, what if we did every other week? It's like, hey, guess what? It's fine. Like, there's something to be said for like early on when you need to have more discussions to like figure out what the project is and have all these discussions. But then I think once you know what you're doing, like you should be, I don't know, working and making the thing.
Fair enough, because you were lead on Fallout 76, so that pretty much is just meetings, right?
Yeah,
that is the job.
It is the job, and like some people don't like it when they are a lead and have that, but then also you have to think about what meetings you're making the rest of the people have, and that's why those are the ones that don't necessarily have to be that way or to be as long. Like I had to sit in meetings sometimes where they were like scrolling through the Slack channel about updates people posted. It's like, dude, we're all in that Slack channel. Like if someone didn't look at it, that's their problem. Like I want new information and discussion. Pretty sure the number of producers on Starfield is like more than the size of the team on Fallout 3.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's like a producer for every 6 or 7 people or something like that. I forgot what exact ballpark number it is for that, but there's some metric like that where they try and have that for managing all the tasks and everything. Which is a lot.
Yeah, I wonder if that's even necessary. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you're obviously in the trenches, so you'd probably have an understanding of it. But there must be a more efficient way of doing it, surely.
I think it depends a lot on the personality types of who you hire as part of it. Like some people, like I think I'm obviously one of those people who can just be like, do this thing, and I'll do that thing, and I'll probably even get it done ahead of time or whatever. But some people need to be like, here's the thing, here's exactly when you need to finish it by, and then they need maybe more checking up on. So it depends on the personality type and the experience level. And at that scale, you can't necessarily be as picky, I think. But
that's
it's
true.
not the way I like to work.
And of course, on top of that, you got outsourcing as well. That's tied into the production.
Outsourcing and the fact that it's multiple studios. So
that's right.
Inherently leads to lots of communication issues and inefficiencies where you do need all these approvals and stuff.
In regards to workflow, the same YouTube channel, Kiwi Talks, had an interview with ex-Bethesda artist Nate Perkypile, who spoke on the subject and suggested that Bethesda would be better off moving to Unreal Engine 5. Perkypile worked on Skyrim, the Fallout series, and Starfield. Perkypile is now in the position of having worked with both the Creation Engine and Unreal Engine 5, and says that things would end up being better if Bethesda switched to UE5, like Halo is doing. However, he also seems skeptical of it actually happening. And he also actually made a clarification post on Twitter about why he said what he said during that interview. And he says, in case it's not clear, I'm not saying it will be zero work. Obviously, it'd be a ton. I just think that's less work than the constant need to play catch up and the lost productivity due to how the Creation Engine works. There's also other factors like way less ramp-up time for hires, a more broad knowledge base due to more people using it, even just a press play button to test stuff in Editor. Those are all huge. So he's talking about how Unreal Engine 5 is a more commonly used or known about engine, whereas the Creation Engine and Creation Engine 2, or even the Hero Engine or whatever, that are basically cobbled together internally or kind of Frankensteinian in some ways, depending on, the game that they are working on over at ZeniMax Media or Bethesda, is just a huge gap, right? It's kind of like a company having their own schematics for a car. So basically, the onboarding process of teaching people who are already game devs, who may have already experience with the more well-known engines like Unity or Unreal Engine 5, into teaching them about how this engine works, will probably have an actual impact on workflow, because you need to first onboard these people, make sure they don't mess things up, and have them knowledgeable enough to be able to be left alone without being micromanaged. So that's what he's talking about here in relation to Unreal Engine 5 versus Bethesda's creation engine. But I want to say here, though, there is a pro with creation engine not a lot of people talk about in regards to Bethesda's business model, right? Because that's in regards to Creation Kit or the mods. So I think Bethesda internally is probably still a lot more comfortable with the idea of using their own engine just because of mods, and how they can monetize mods, or how they can add longevity to their games with mods. So it's kind of a hard place to be stuck in for them. On one hand, yes, they can absolutely modernize and onboard people faster and maybe have a better workflow with Unreal Engine 5. But I think with creation, they're kind of like maybe afraid of letting that go, right? And saying, okay, well, if we let this go, then we'll lose out on what we've kind of built up so far internally and for our modding community. And PerkyPaw actually goes on to say, yes, Epic Games does take a 5% cut of Unreal Engine 5, but think about how much it costs to try to build the engines all by yourself. And engines can get very costly, millions of dollars, years of work, and how much time every single content creator has lost working with a tool that needs to reload literally the entire game anytime you want to test something. Anyone who has worked with the CK knows how this is. Iteration is key to good games, and it's a huge time sink. If that changes, great, but that's just one of many factors. Working with Unreal honestly felt like emerging from the dark ages. There's no way I could have shipped my game all by myself using the creation engine. I implemented countless features in less time. They even have one meeting to talk about the possibility of putting something in. Right, so he's talking about the kind of bureaucratic, or I guess the very slow workflow at Bethesda, right? In the time that they could have had a meeting about putting a chair into Starfield or whatever, or fruit, he did a lot of things for his own game. That is called The Axis Unseen, by the way, for those of you guys who want to check it out. I'm sure others disagree, but you should use both engines before jumping to any conclusion about it. Game engines are incredibly complicated, and there's a reason studios like 343 and CD Projekt Red have jumped to Unreal. Beware to some cost fallacy. I think you're completely missing the point if you reply to me saying, oh, Unreal has issues. The sheer number of engineers already on the team could completely or absolutely address things like that. Not every Unreal game is the same. For instance, my game runs on the Steam Deck, a lot don't. A lot look like out-of-the-box Unreal games with that smeary motion blur. Mine does not. Some games have shader compile setters. Mine does not. Hellblade 2, for example, also does not. A lot of people have asked about mods, and it's something that could be supported with work. And he's kind of talking about what I just brought up, actually, in regards to Creation Engine, kind of like making that space for mods. And he's arguing that Unreal Engine, with a team behind it for a game, could make that same accommodation. So it's interesting to see their various opinions on workflow at Bethesda Game Studios, on what kind of engine should be used at Bethesda Game Studios, what kind of people are at Bethesda Game Studios. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. It's been enlightening, and I wish Will Shen, I wish Nate Perkypaw and all these other former devs the best of luck. Sounds like they're really great, down-to-earth people. And I would like to also thank you guys for hanging out with me and just watching this video and using your own precious time. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content, as that directly supports my efforts as well. And until then, see you next time.